This is the Chronorad Alert. Civil defense information will be broadcast at 6:40.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Y2K, how can we prepare?
Stop a few of their machines and radios. Throw them into darkness for a few hours.
We are fighting for our lives. My family must survive.
Over 5 years, 1,000 gallons of gas, air filtration, water filtration.
Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada, streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Rumble, and Odyssey. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim. Today is June the 16th, 2024. This is episode 457 of Workshop Radio. Happy Father's Day to all my fellow delinquents out there. I hope you had a great time with your family. I ate just a little too much. All my kids were here. It was a great day, but that's not exactly what we're here for this evening. We are here for an incredible guest. You guys know the power of community, and quite often I get some of the best guests and the nicest folks on this show by recommendation of people whom I trust. And if you guys know Bobby Spags, he's a dude that I have literally broke bread with in person. So he's a dude that I trust. He's a guy. And when he says, hey, you need to have this lady named the Combat Midwife on your show, I take his advice and I reach out to her and I'm like, hey, I'm in the middle of a 2-month road trip. I'd love to have you on, but I want to have you on when I'm in my studio. She's like, yeah, let's make it happen. So without further ado, guys, throw your questions out as we go along. I will star them and we'll get to them as we go along. But give me a moment here and I'll bring on Jessica. Hey, Jessica, how are you?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me.
Hey, anytime. This is great. I'm excited. I got a lot of friends who are in the emergency medical kind of end of things, and I've had 5 or 6 folks on here. Even a vet one time, not a military vet, but an animal vet. Yes. But I believe you're the first midwife that I've ever had on the show. So awesome. I want to get to that term, but before we do, tell us a little bit about who Jessica is, where you came from, your background, maybe your first job in high school, that kind of thing.
Okay. You want my first W-2 job, or you want my first
whatever an interesting story. I always love hearing where people come from, what makes them tick, you know?
Yeah. So I was a pretty sought after babysitter in my day, and I ran quite the mafia ring when it came to babysitting. I would have parents fighting over me.
I love hearing that. My daughter does the same thing, and boy, I tell you, it's a way to get into the money when you're young, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I had families on rotation, and they would kind of fight over who got Jessica to babysit their kids. All the dishes were done, laundry was folded, children were tucked into bed, the floor was vacuumed, and then I sat there and watched TV and did homework.
I love it. That's cool. So how'd you come about into the emergency preparedness and into midwifery, if that's the proper terminology, is it? And, I guess emergency medical?
Yeah, it's technically midwifery, but I'll take whatever. So how did I get started? Okay, golly gee whiz. Well, I'm a homeschool kid, and so we kind of think outside the box. And so I kind of always been in the mindset of questioning things and thinking, how can I do this myself? So I guess I was just raised that way, and in a way that, how can we figure out how to do things? And that's from everything from siblings and I taking apart telephones and putting them back together again, or, figuring out how we can build something in the backyard or whatever. So I think that's just kind of how I was raised, and that's the mindset I have. And then I always knew I wanted to deliver babies. You can call my mom right now. I recommend you don't. She's probably enjoying a nice Sunday evening, but you could call her right now and she would say, oh yeah, Jessica always said she wanted to deliver babies. And so, yeah, so that was kind of just, that was just my path. My path was I thought I was going to go to medical school, and then I had a minor midlife crisis panic attack, as a firstborn daughter of a bigger family would do. And so I went, oh gosh, I don't really want to spend a bunch of money going to medical school what if I can't actually see blood? What if that freaks me out? That would be weird. And so I had uncles who were firefighters in the EMS realm as well. And they said, if you can become a firefighter and an EMT, you can do anything. So before I graduated high school, I did both of those things, and I fell in love with it. And then that took me down the EMS path. And yeah, how much more do you have the story you want to hear?
Oh, I love it. Yeah. So yeah, EMS path and firefighting. And I didn't, to pardon my ignorance, but I didn't even realize you could get involved in that before the end of high school. How do you do that?
Oh, so I basically said, Mom, I'd like to go take this class. And again, I guess coming from kind of a homeschool family, it's like knowledge is so important and a big part of how I was brought up. And so Mom just signed a piece of paper. Basically, you do waiver stuff, if we break her, you can't sue us type of thing. Right. So and I actually had to have additional paperwork signed because I took the national registry exam before I was even 18. So so that was really cool. And before I even finished high school, I was doing fire and EMS, and that was really cool and a huge learning experience. So I already had a few years of education under my belt before I even got into my 20s.
So you mentioned the thought of what if you couldn't handle blood? So we actually, we run, my wife and I, we have 3 different daycares, and we actually had our first major accident just recently. A boy fell off a climber, broke his arm, and had the protrusion through the skin,
and nice. He did a good one.
He sure did. And we have great staff. Yeah, so true. And my girls, the girls that were there, responded incredibly. But one of them said they didn't think they would have been able to handle something like that if it happened before. I get maybe 2 questions, and you can go as deep or not, but how do you find out without actually needing to suffer a compound fracture? How do you find out if you're okay with blood? And then if you're not, is it something that you can become accustomed to, or at least comfortable enough that you could handle it in a shit hits the fan kind of scenario?
I mean, I will go off of just my personal experience. I mean, I have a sibling that used to just pass out when they would see blood. I found that highly entertaining as a bad snotty big sister, but that sibling no longer has that issue. I mean, they have children of their own, and they've moved on from that response, but they used to just completely get woozy and pass out. I think certain people have callings to do certain things. I like animals too much that there's just no way I would ever be a good vet. I mean, I could definitely take care of an animal if they were hurt, but it would physically make me ill. And I don't love everything about medicine. I hate surgery. It makes me nauseous. I don't like it. I've definitely been in my fair share of them, but the actual injury to the body, I don't want to see that. If it's already done, that's fine. But the actual injury process, especially driving down the road and, you see it in a car accident happen. I know what the kinematics of trauma is in the human body of me going, okay, I know exactly what happened to them in there. And it's too much. My brain doesn't want something bad to happen to somebody, but if there is something that happens and I didn't necessarily witness that, my brain is in a completely different frame. So I think everybody is very different. I know that there are plenty of people that love surgery and love doing all that kind of stuff, but they don't really like a different type of medicine. And I think it's the fear is what really propels people into spiraling out. And that's understandable. Every one of us on the planet has something that they're absolutely petrified about. I mean, I have a list of them, right? Like, if you want to see me completely lose my mind, I can't handle ticks. Okay. I can't do it.
Oh, no.
They freak me out. I know what they do to the body. I can't handle it. I mean, legitimately, hands clammy, the whole 9 yards. Okay. I don't like them. Everybody has their weak spot, if you want to call it that. I don't think that's necessarily a weakness. I think it's just something that someone has a hard time with. That just means that you're not cut out for that. And that's okay, because in a preparedness situation, guess what you are prepared to do? Your specialty. Maybe you're really good at water sanitization. Maybe you're really good at communication and radios. Those things are so cool to me, but I don't understand how radios work. And I don't know how all of that happens. And so that's not something that I feel just born to do. Right. So that's why building a community is just so important. All of that to say, I think you can desensitize yourself to something that does really upset you and makes you freak out by having knowledge about that. And that removes a lot of the fear. Kind of like, I've trained hundreds of thousands of soldiers how to do a lot of these medical things, including delivering babies in very austere environments. No one's weird like me and wants to do that. Okay. Drop me in the middle of nowhere and say, go take care of all these women health problems. That sounds like a fun Saturday to me. That does not sound like a fun Saturday to you. And that's okay. But what I can do is I can help you feel prepared. And so that will take away a lot of the stress response, and knowing how something functions will help. That just is no different than parenting. And the fact that if you have a child who's really fearful about something, maybe that's making friends on the playground, removing the fear aspect of it significantly decreases the failure rate. Right. And then from there, the child can actually flourish in any environment because you've given them the tools to succeed.
That's perfect. Yeah. Thank you. So how did you go from, like senior in high school, taking paramedic and firefighting courses, to becoming the combat midwife? Where did that come in?
So I got headhunted after we officially declared war, and I got headhunted by the Army that asked me to come interview for a position of instructing what we call the 68 whiskeys. They've had several renditions of names, but that's what they're called today. And that's the combat medic. So I'd be your ground medic. And I had no idea what the heck that was. I didn't come from a family that had a recent military background. Both my grandfathers served in the Navy, but I had no idea what that was. And from a very young age, I've always had the rule of never saying no to an interview, because you have no idea what type of relationship you may cultivate from that, even if you don't wind up taking the job.
Sure.
So I said, yeah, I got hired on the spot. I had no idea what I was really doing, but I was also simultaneously going through midwifery school at the time. And so I kind of flourished in what we call medical emergencies and special populations. So that would include pediatrics, neonates, pregnancy, women's health, patients with special needs, et cetera, geriatrics. And so those are kind of my areas of specialty, and my combat medics called me that. So they wound up giving me a call sign, kind of like Goose, if you will, or Maverick from, Top Gun. And they just started calling me the combat midwife, and it took off. And so that's how people know me by that today.
Love it. So let's start. I want to talk kind of about being a midwife in general, and then we'll talk more about like an SHTF kind of scenario down the road a little bit. So for those, I would think in this day and age, most folks have at least heard of the concept of a midwife, but can you kind of refresh us a little bit about what it is? And then maybe what is the difference between that and a doula? Because I've heard those words thrown around, and I'm I'm a dude, I don't always keep up on that stuff.
Right, absolutely. So midwives have historically been the caregivers for women and children throughout all of history. Midwives are even talked about a few different times in the Bible. They're in tons of different ancient texts, and they're even depicted in hieroglyphics in Egypt and all sorts of things. So historically, midwives have been taking care of women. Now, we don't speak Old English anymore, but the term midwife in Old English means a woman caring for another woman. It translates directly to women caring for other women or with women. So that's kind of the backstory on that. And then we had a huge smear campaign, if you will, in the early 1900s, which we know why, Rockefeller's taking over the medical community, blah, 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 blah. And that kind of turned into why we don't have them as much anymore. But a midwife is someone who's going to care for women during their childbearing years and through the end. So that would be through postpartum and babies and young children. And in some cultures, they even took care of the dying and prepared them for death. And so they would take care of the community, just like there was a community blacksmith and there was a community gardener, etc. There was a community midwife, and they were trained just like other professions. You'd have a youngster who would kind of get brought up in that arena, and she'd have her own children, and then they'd pass the torch when she was a sweet little old lady. So that's kind of how that happened. And so that's kind of the history. And so translate that into today. It looks different in different countries regarding education, but they all pretty much do the same thing. The pathway may be a little bit different, but that's just all, red tape, if you will. So a doula is someone that is more or less an emotional, physical, mental support person. So they're going to not play a medical role in that pregnant person and partner's life. So they're going to be providing emotional support. I like to think of doulas like insurance policies. You have it on your house and you hope to never need it. And so, but if something bad was to happen or something that you didn't understand how to navigate with your house, the water heater goes out. That person would know how to navigate that, and they would be able to help you find out what the best way is. Obviously, I'm being way more generous to insurance companies than they deserve, but you get the gist overall. And so that's kind of how I like to explain it to individuals, where me in the midwife role, I'm playing more of the medical role. I can and absolutely will support someone mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, but you kind of want me in the game of operations on how to actually get little one out.
So just to make sure that I'm right here then. So a doula would be somebody who would be with a couple during a home birth, but mainly, or would they also be at a hospital birth as well?
Sure, they could absolutely provide care in a hospital or situation as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then a midwife would be taking an active role. Mm-hmm. Typically, a midwife would happen in a home environment, or at least away from a medical facility environment for the most part, or no?
That's not necessarily true. I mean, you have midwives primarily provide care for pregnant women unless there's an emergency that shows up in Canada, unless I'm completely mistaken. But that's how I was educated in school, is that Europe, mostly all of Europe, definitely the UK, definitely Ireland, Australia for sure. And I was under the impression Canada as well. Primarily you see a midwife, and then if something goes awry, then you would see a physician. Again, it could change over the years, and I'm sure things have changed since I've been in school. That was quite a bit of time ago. So, but yeah, it's primarily who you would see in those other countries until something went off the beaten path. And so they would practice in hospital and out of hospital. I personally only practice out of hospital because I don't trust or like hospitals or doctors.
So if my wife and that's okay, I'm down with that. I get it. So if my wife and I came to you and this was a few years ago and we're like, hey, we'd like to have, well, we had twins. Our last were twins, but I mean, so if we said we want to have a home birth, what's the process? Where do you start with that?
Yeah, so really you're not going to see things change in necessarily like the amount of prenatal appointments you would go to. Those would mirror image each other than to the medical model of care. It's just how and what you would be doing. So most midwives believe that birth is a normal physiological, and pregnancy is a normal physiological process during a woman's life. No different than breathing.
Sure.
No different than excreting urine from your body or perspirating. None of us in this room need help doing those things. I would assume that you don't have anybody on a respirator near you. So most of us don't need help. Now, are there situations where people do need help doing those things? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Very rarely, but most of the time, human bodies know how to do those things all by them little lonesomes. They know how to do that. So midwives, since our thought process is that birth is a normal physiological process, we're really hands off. So unless something deviates from, I don't really love using the word normal.
Sure.
But until something turns into a problem, then we just let women do their things. Babies are going to come out when they come out. There's really no need to evict children. There's, in the history of the planet, no child has gone to college in the womb. So we just leave them alone. They will come out. Where the medical model of care, they believe that, and I'm not making this up, you can go read what they believe, and it's that birth and pregnancy is a condition. It's a disease process that must be managed.
Wow.
And so it's just a different outlook on how our human bodies work and what they can and cannot do. And so for the most part, that is what midwives believe. Now, I will say this, and it's very sad, breaks my heart, which is why I do what I do, and that is the medical model of care is infiltrating the midwifery model of care. And so now you're starting to see things, and you'll hear people, I claim to be a traditional midwife. And so you'll see people start to talk about medwives, like M-E-D, meaning they're practicing medicine in the guise of midwifery, kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And so that's unfortunate, but it is what it is.
So I guess, yeah. So you're for the most part, then you're kind of there and just kind of guiding. And if like during the actual physical birth, like you also do the prenatal appointment, like if
absolutely, yeah.
Nothing's
going to change. You're still going to do prenatal appointments. You can still have tests if you want to have tests. You can have no tests if you don't want to have them. If you want an ultrasound, fine. If you don't, that's cool too. My job is to educate you and point you in the right direction. So go back to the beginning of our conversation where I said, if you remove the fear, then people will be able to process what's going on in their lives. And we're so detached from family. We don't live with grandma and grandpa. We don't have aunties and uncles around. Humans are more detached from their family unit than we've ever been in the history of this planet. And so we just don't have the stories being told. And they're eliminating our ability to pass on knowledge that way. In fact, Hawaii just passed a law this past year, 6 months or so, where mamas, aunties, it is illegal to share birth knowledge with women now. You can't do it.
Why?
Right? Asinine, right? Because you don't want the Indigenous people sharing their knowledge and wealth of knowledge about how to have babies naturally. You want them dependent on the system. You want them to go to the hospital. You want them to buy the service that is there. A C-section is extremely expensive. We're talking $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 to have. And what would you want to spend? What do you want to sell more of? You want to sell more of those, or you want to sell the hours-long labor where it takes multiple people to get that process going? So it's all about money. If you survive 2020, I would hope that someone is awake going, yeah, this whole thing is a sham, if you weren't already awake to it beforehand. And so we're commodities being sold on a market, and infants are very expensive in the medical model of care, where, this is a very horrible business model on my part, but I'm way less expensive to purchase to have at a birth than a physician in a hospital with all those problems they're going to cause. So, people like to freak out about things like, oh my gosh, there's twins, or oh my gosh, the baby's breech, or oh my gosh, what about bleeding? None of this stuff happens in the out of hospital situation. And it's very easy to take care of and manage because everyone in here knows how to have a baby. Like it's pretty common knowledge, and your body works just fine. It's when we start to do things to women that they're unable to do that. If I stuck you in a room in the morning when you went to go have your office meeting with yourself in your bathroom, and I put bright lights in there, I made you lay on your back with your legs in stirrups, and I put 10, 12 people in there all staring at your butthole, you'd have a hard time.
Absolutely.
Producing an item.
Right.
You know,
sure.
Like that would be really invasive. And I'm not comparing a bowel movement to giving birth. Okay, those are not synonymous. However, it's something that we all do every morning, or at least I hope you're doing every morning. And we're all going through that process. We do that in privacy, right? We don't have a lot of people around. That's weird. That's invasive. And so it's important for us to have that same thought process. If we put women in these situations where they're detached, they're wearing a gown that someone died in 10 days ago, they're on sheets that feel essentially like the roughest sandpaper known to man, they're on a mattressy thing that I don't know that a Barbie could fit on. Okay, I got hips wider than that thing, and it's uncomfortable. It's in a really invasive situation. And in a home birth, it's dark, it's quiet, we're respectful, we dim the lights, we feed her constantly, we're hydrating her. She's running a marathon. We get her in and out of the birth tub. We walk, we do squats, we have music playing, we have her sister rubbing her back. It's a much different environment, and that is a place that is full of support, and it's conducive to bodily functions doing their job.
I'm just curious because I'm totally with you on the idea of it being, I'm a guy, so but being a natural experience, something that women have done literally forever.
Sure.
So what do you, in your experience, what is your what percentage of births end up either needing to go to the hospital or have a real serious emergency?
Midwives have an extremely low transfer rate. Most of the time, if they do transfer, it's for a first-time mom who's had a really long early labor and she's tuckered out because she decided to not listen to her midwife and do all the things that we told her to do, which was rest and eat and sleep and chill out. But they have the first contraction, they get all excited and they start doing all the things. And I said, go rest, because this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And that's okay. People can get tuckered out, and I'm zero judgment. I'm just being honest and forthright about it. It's just something that happens more commonly with first-time moms. They get tuckered out, and so they go in for pain management and they have a baby really quickly. That's not a medical necessity, so I don't count those as transfers, like part of my transfer rate. But midwives typically, you can look at the World Health Organization. I know they're absolute garbage, but they do have they really do have good data on birth stats. And so it's a great resource. You can look at Amnesty International. They have really good resources too. They have decades and decades of numbers of birth outcomes. And you can see that there are third world countries that have better outcomes than the United States, than Canada, and than other places, because they have midwives delivering babies and they keep moms home. Babies die in those places for infection reasons, post-delivery, for things like mom doesn't have access to water. Okay. Those are completely different situations. It's not birth that's killing them. Our first world environment is so petrified of birth. It's like I said, a smear campaign. It's propaganda that's been going on since the beginning of time. And it's all about telling women that we're not magical, that we are not mysterious, that we don't have the ability, that we're broken. And that's not true. And so that was all a ploy to get us to buy in and sell ourselves to the medical system and buy what they were selling, which is quote unquote pain management, and surgical procedures and a whole bunch of other things that really just cause a whole bunch of other problems, like inability to breastfeed and long-term pain and sexual dysfunction and urinary and incontinence problems and a whole host of other issues.
What about so I've been in with my wife, of course, and my sister, and she was very open with me, and she ended up needing a couple of stitches. Is that something you do, or is that something that, I just curious. I forget what they called it, but it was, her need for that.
Yeah. Sometimes, again, that can be, usually when women need to have sutures, it's because there's been a mismanagement of the labor process. It's a very low rate of needing to have sutures in an out of hospital birth. Sometimes I have to refresh my memory as I'm getting all my equipment back together. Like, okay, how do I do this again? Because we just don't do it very often. And, it's like riding a bike. If you've done it before, you stumble a couple of times, you get the bike moving. And it's really because we're forcing women to push so back to back. They do that like in the movies, the counting 1 to 10 garbage of push, and they're just yelling at her to push. That's not how women are made to push. Again, I'll use the rudimentary example of a bowel movement, and that is, you don't do that when you're doing that process either. You'll hurt yourself. I mean, you'll cause an anal fissure, which is a tear of mucosal tissue, which is exactly what we're dealing with in the other end. And so it will cause an injury. And that's why we just don't do that. So we tell women to push when they feel the urge to push, and then to back off of it when it's gone. And that allows that ebb and flow of stretch of tissue. That tissue is supposed to stretch, but if we push a bowling ball through there really fast, you're going to have a blowout. And so sutures would be needed, but yes, I can do that. Sometimes it just happens because moms are stuck in a position that feels really comfortable to them, which is maybe not optimal for baby's head placement. And, you got to pick and choose your battles. Sometimes that just happens. But again, most of the time it doesn't happen. But yes, a good midwife would know how to do things like an IV. We carry emergency medications. They know how to do sutures. They know how to do neonatal resuscitation. They know how to take care of a postpartum hemorrhage. A good traditional midwife would be comfortable with things like multiple, so twins, breeches, that kind of stuff.
Okay. You might have just did a really good segue into my next question. So you've spent some time in some austere settings, I think, from the reading. Mm-hmm. So what are the I guess the most common things that a midwife, or in this instance, a family who was giving birth in an austere scenario, what are the most common problems or scenarios that they may end up having to deal with?
Well, I think birth is the same no matter where the location is. when we talk austere, it just means we have limited resources to the outside world, but the process isn't really any different. I mean, if you think about it, a cow giving birth in a field versus in a stable, it's really not that different, right? It's just what resources I have. I can pick up a phone and I can call the vet in the stable, right? I can't pick up the phone necessarily and call for help if I'm in an austere environment. So being prepared, but things like postpartum hemorrhage and cords around the neck and long labor processes, hydration, all of that stuff is still going to be the same. I don't know that there's a specific extra risk factor or a new problem that I would see in an austere environment that I wouldn't necessarily see in a non-austere environment.
That's fair. Then, so maybe I should frame it as what kind of skills, if you're a young couple and this is a prep that you want to put together,
Sure.
What kind of materials should you have on hand and what kind of skills should you try to learn so that you could do that sort of thing?
Well, shameless plug, you should come to one of my skill classes and then you should have my Combat Midwife kit. But you just need some very basic things. A lot of times people will have enough stuff around their house, clean blankets. Really, it's labor stuff that you should probably pay a little bit more attention to, and that is keeping moms fed and hydrated is super important. Even people who are running those huge Ironman marathons eat and drink during that process. And so you're running a big marathon, and it's important to stay hydrated and stay fed during the whole process so you can actually perform the skill and do the work that you need to do. But for particular items that you would need, it would depend on the austere environment, right? Like what type of environment are we talking about? Are we talking about somebody that's up in the tundra by you, right? Where it's cold, yep. Right? Where we're dealing with things like power could go out. We're dealing with things like snowstorms and I don't have access to things like pipes could freeze. So I wouldn't necessarily have water. That's a different mindset than I'm in a different hemisphere, right? And I'm dealing with heat issues. So I think looking at your overall environment of where you're going to be, and then think about how would I need to survive, even if someone wasn't necessarily pregnant or someone wasn't necessarily giving birth. And once you've kind of taken care of those issues, then you can stay on top of, okay, well, now how do I take care of these things? And then I would probably give someone the first resource I recommend to everybody is to get the book called Heart and Hands. It's by Elizabeth Davis, and it's probably my favorite midwifery textbook, and it's very user-friendly. It's beautifully written. I read that and it still gets me a little choked up because it's just it's a precious written book. It's just very heartwarming. And I loved it. And it was my first book that I read in midwifery school. And I absolutely loved it. There's a ton of other textbooks that if you wanted to be really like cerebral about it, I could recommend, but that is probably a beautiful owner's manual style introduction to birth. And it's not just birth, it goes through pregnancy and postpartum and breastfeeding as well. So it would be just a really great, easy read. And you wouldn't necessarily have to read it from cover to cover. You could use it more like an owner's manual and look up a particular topic if that's just something you wanted to deep dive then.
And that was Heart and Hands by Elizabeth. What was the last name?
Davis.
Okay. I'll put that in the notes for her right here, guys. I just put it into the comments there. So, if you, as far as like your kit, for instance, what kind of stuff is in that so that people,
So in my kit, I have the bare necessities of what you would need in a poop hits the oscillating device situation. So how that kit came to be, so people have a little bit of a background on that, is I've trained the combat medics, the flight medics. I've trained soft guys like the PJs and other things in the military. So I've worked with all branches of service. I've worked with all of their different medical on the ground. So troop style movement, type gentleman. And it was after a class that I was teaching, and the guys were hanging out. They were asking a bunch of questions, and they were like, Miss A, so like, what do we need? Like, what can we use in our bag? They were going on a very specific humanitarian mission, and they know that, you know, once they're in that type of environment, the locals will want the Americans to take care of them. And so they know that there's a situation that they could be taking care of an interpreter's wife or child, etc. So they were like, you know, what do we need to have in order to, you know, what can we use in the aid bag that we have? And I was like, well, let's figure this out. What do we have? What can we use? So we wound up taking an aid bag and dumping it on a table. There were a couple beers that were tossed around, and we all just sat there and said, okay, like, what could we double duty, triple duty in here that would work? And I was like, okay, so, you know, a abdominal dressing could be a great idea for a pad after she's given birth. You know, you could use this item to do this task. You could, anyway. And I was like, man, I wish you had a couple of these extra things. And so we went digging through the, you know, we have those locker style containers that you would have in classrooms. And I was like, I wish you had these few items in your bag, and then it would be complete, and you could deliver a baby and take care of a mom postpartum and a baby too. And they were like, you should just make a kit for us. And that's how it came, you know, was conceptualized. That was a midwife pun. And so that's just how it came to be. And so I took all of those items, I put it in one kit. And so now people can grab that, and it's grown from there. And so now there's multiple things that people can have. And so it's kind of the Combat Midwife flight, if you will. and so you can have the OB kit, you know, the neonatal kit, the GYN, so the non-pregnant female emergency kit, the pediatric, etc. So those things all kind of come together, and they equal just the experiences and feedback from my guys who have been in austere environments, myself with my own austere experience, and we all kind of just threw those things together, and they've created this flight, of different things. So in that OB kit, you're going to have the bare necessities you would need with not needing to go find and grab other stuff. So things like a blanket and a hat for the baby, a birth certificate, an ink pad, scissors, measuring tape, ways to stop postpartum hemorrhage if you got into that situation, a little thing from me on like you know, 1 equals A, that kind of a list of things to do. And yeah, kind of all comes in one little compartment.
That's really cool. So we didn't talk a whole lot about yet, but we've talked about the birth process. But what about kind of female health and medical issues and child, like you know, infant and little kids health issues that might arise in those kind of situations too?
Our cute little pediatric patients are really susceptible to things like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. So things that would cause them to become dehydrated. That's something that they're very susceptible to. Human children have a piss poor ability to regulate their temperature and regulate their fluids. There's a reason for that, but I'm not going to turn this to an anatomy and physiology class, so I'll spare you on that. But there is a reason for that process, and they have really thin skin, they have low muscle mass, high fat mass, they've got these big bobble heads. You know, there's some predisposing risk factors to them just not being very good at those things. They also stick everything in their mouth, which means they're very tactile and they experience their world through their mouth. And that's lovely. And we love that about them because it helps their brain develop. However, it puts them at more susceptible, you know, you're a parent, which means you've heard the 3 a.m. mom, right? Where they finish the sentence and you're like, why the carpet? Why is it always the carpet? But yeah, so kids are just susceptible. So knowing how to navigate those things when you can't run to the corner store and pick up the crap Pedialyte, the Imodium, all that stuff that is not good for human consumption to begin with, and knowing how you can use things in your own kitchen and understand the physiological process. Most first world people are absolutely petrified of fevers. And they don't understand that fevers have a biological process. They're meant to be there. When you're treating a fever, you're treating a symptom of a microorganism. And so instead of focusing on what is the microorganism, what it is, its life cycle, why are we in the phase that we're in right now, we go straight to let's get rid of the fever. That's really silly. I mean, that's essentially like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and throwing the jelly to the neighbor's house. Like, why? That doesn't make any sense. And so we need to realize why bodies do the things that they do, and then how to kind of fix those things. So in my classes, I like to go into why does the body do those things? How can it stop those processes if we do need to stop those? There are certain periods of time, like if your child or your loved one is not lucid, like if they're in and out of consciousness, that's now we have a problem. The fever has the microorganism is overrunning the body, and so now the fever can't keep up with the situation. We don't have homeostasis anymore. But when you have a 4-year-old who's got a snotty nose and they're puking all over the place, they have a really high fever, but they're playing with their Legos, leave that child alone. They are functioning. Their body is working. So it doesn't make any sense to change it up. So I try to take away the mystification of like how human body works, and I make it very tangible. We talk about cars a lot in my classes because that's something that we can beat. We all have, even if you're not good at working on cars, you know what it looks like. You've looked under the hood before, you understand a clunky sound. And so I take that kind of common knowledge that we all have and I put it into humans because there's really not a big difference. And I kind of just take away all the scariness from it. When it comes to female health, non-pregnant, so the medical model of care would call that gynecological care, it's things like yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, kidney stones. What else am I forgetting? Pregnancies that are not viable. So things like ectopic pregnancies. It's birth control, understanding our menstrual cycle. All of this stuff is it's just not common knowledge anymore in our culture to even know what or how our cycle even works. And so I start at the very basics. I mean, we're going 7th grade science on all of this stuff. And we're going, so this is an egg, this is a sperm, right? Like we're going back to the beginning because we need to understand that stuff in order to recognize those problems and take care of them. So I like to kind of give people things that they can just use in a lot of stuff you have maybe even in your own medicine cabinet, your prepper closet, your prepper pantry, whatever you like to call it. And then even just some simple stuff around the house, you might be able to take care of a lot of these things on their own.
So I might already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask what's the easiest way to rehydrate, if that's the right word, a person? So somebody who's dehydrated, whether it's a kid, because you said, Pedialyte's junk. I'm guessing Gatorade's probably a bit the same, but
that's trash too. I love coconut water. Or you can do, it's sometimes hard to get coconut water into people who maybe are not fond of the flavor. And so I typically say, hey, do sparkly water, orange juice, and coconut water. And that's a really great way to do it. Popsicles are another really good thing. So I would take that same kind of mixture and put it in popsicle form, and kids will chomp that down. They'll eat the heck out of those things. Another really good thing is, I know salt has been villainized in our culture for a really long time, but we really can't function without salt. So probably one of the best takeaways I ever learned in paramedic school is wherever salt goes, water follows. Wherever salt goes, water follows. So our cells have a semi-permeable membrane, just like the screen that is on your windows. And that window can't be opened unless you have the key. And salt is one of the many keys. That's why our electrolytes are so important. They unlock certain areas of the cell and engage them to do their job, whether they're a brain cell, a skin cell, a breast cell, a testicle cell, a liver cell, whatever their job is, whatever they're supposed to do. You need to have the keys to unlock them and ignite their power. So think of like your key to your car, right? You can have a perfectly running car. There's gas in the tank. The engine's great. You got oil in the car. There's tires, the whole 9 yards. But if I take your keys and again, I throw it to the same neighbors I gave the jelly, the car's not going anywhere.
Sure.
It's absolutely useless to you. And so I need to be able to unlock that cell. And the way I do that is by having the key. And salt, so sodium, is one of the ways to do that. So how does that tie with hydration? Well, in order for water, so H2O, to get into the cell, I need to have sodium to unlock that. And it's important that we have the right kind of it. So things like Celtic's sea salt or Redmond's salt is going to be great. Not Himalayan. That stuff is trash. It's not my favorite. I have that's a whole lecture on itself. Come back for that one. But that's not my favorite. And yeah, so those are actually real salt. But the white table salt that's been ionized, that's garbage. Throw that away. That's cancer causing trash. Put that in, don't even throw it away. It's garbage.
So yeah, because we're big fans of salt around here too. So it's important then to make sure, like, would you add some extra sodium to water if that's all you had at that point?
Yeah. So what I would do is I would take that same mixture, some coconut water, some OJ, because you want to try to get it down the kiddo's throat. And if you're not a fan of coconut, there are some people that just don't like it at all. I understand. I happen to love it, but some people don't like it. That's fine. I understand. Do a little orange juice or cranberry juice or something that you love. That's fine. It could even be a lemonade if you wanted something like that. I don't care. And then coconut water. You could throw some sparkly, bubbly water in there just to make it fun because you don't feel good, and that's great. And then I would put some salt in there. Some good real salt. Redmond's real salt. I'm drinking that right now. I put a lemon and coconut water and salt in here.
Nice. So what are some, do you have any other tips or anything that folks, something that maybe we've overlooked or something that a lot of people end up overlooking in these kind of situations and scenarios?
I think a lot of times people overlook how different a woman's body is. We have extra parts, we have extra hormones, and that means we have extra disease processes and injuries that we can obtain. And so when, I'm not speaking poorly. It is Father's Day. I love all you men. You're wonderful. You guys are great. I love all the work that you do. But men are kind of in the prepper world a little bit more, and you guys are focused on things that make sense in your logical brain, and that's great. I'm glad I have all the MREs. I am so glad you have communication and radios down. You got the Band-Aids and beans and all that stuff down pat, because we don't think about that stuff as ladies, and so that's wonderful. I'm glad that you are here to do your job. We love you. However, when it comes to medical stuff, sometimes we're not as prepared for that as we could be. And while a yeast infection sounds like not a really fun topic to talk about on any day, especially on Father's Day, it is something we do need to think about, because that can actually really hurt somebody and cause irreversible harm in a situation where I can't get to the store and get things. And so being able to stock up on stuff like tea tree suppositories, shelf-stable probiotics, know how to make your own yogurts, fermented foods. So you're adding good things for your gut biome. Like, that's really important stuff, and knowing how to use those things. My trick that I teach everybody is garlic suppositories. Everybody has garlic in their house. And you can do garlic for, I would say, a good 12 to 14 days to really kill whatever the heck is in there. But in about 24 to 48 hours, a woman who has a yeast infection and is doing garlic suppositories will feel 100% better. So, but I would say, especially if someone's dealing with a really bad one, a raging yeast infection, or external tissue is inflamed and affected as well. External genitalia, I would say a good 12 to 14 days would be a great way. But non-nicked, peeled garlic clove up the hatch. It's a closed unit. It's not going to go anywhere. You're not going to lose it. And your body will purge it in the morning. So I usually tell women, push it up and tuck it behind your cervix, because your cervix moves depending on what part of your cycle you're on. And so I say, tuck it up behind there. And then in the morning, when you go to the bathroom, as soon as you sit on the toilet, your body will purge it out. Now, if you want to, we're just going to be real here because we're all adults. But
Absolutely.
if you were to catch that garlic and smell it in the morning, it would not smell like garlic anymore. It would smell like yeast, because it is absorbing the infection. So it is pulling it out of your body. We all know how strong garlic is, and we all know how it'll kill a cold and other viruses and bacteria, etc. And so it'll work on fungus as well, and yeast.
I'm not as up on natural remedies as I probably should be. I'm the first guy that likes to stock antibiotics and things. And it's just been one of my weaknesses for sure. But do you have any other kind of natural tips or anything, or that might come to mind that I probably am not smart enough to think to ask?
Yeah. So UTIs are other common issues that women can get. So there's a reason for this. So men's genitalia is external, ours is internal. And so because of that, it means it's warm, it's wet, and it's dark. So those are beautiful places for microorganisms to grow, multiply, and do what they do best, which is make micro babies. And while I love babies, I hate micro babies. And so those guys have to die. And so some things to think about is not only that, but our urethra is shorter. So men have external genitalia, so it's a longer pathway. So not only is it outside and it's less warm, but it's also the fact that it's a longer road. And so that means that bacteria is usually dying before it ever gets to things like the bladder or the kidneys, etc. So it's not that women are more exposed necessarily, unless she's living a alternative lifestyle, like multiple partners, not cleaning well, or in an austere environment, such as she's deployed with the military and can't get to a normal bathroom to clean herself, or doesn't have access to a shower because you're out and camping or whatever. You can't get to where you need to be. Then that's a situation that would put her more at risk. But normally humans across the globe are just going to have the same exposure to bacteria. It's just how it works. It's just your equipment is different. And so you have less disease processes that stay in the body. So because of that, a good thing to think about would be vitamin C. So I like liposomal vitamin C, because that's vitamin C that's actually going to be easier metabolized in the body. It's broken down. And again, I'm trying not to get super sciencey and nerdy on you, because I will do that. But it's in a form that is easier absorbed in the body. The process has already been started. So it's kind of like the baby bird method of vitamin C, where mom's already broken down the worm, right? Now baby doesn't have to process as much. That's what liposomal vitamin C means. And then the other thing that I would do is D-mannose. And then cranberry concentrate would be another really good thing. I have a list of my favorite items. They're on my Amazon storefront of my favorite things. I can even make a story about those on Instagram later today if you really wanted me to. Probably do or post about it or something. I have tons of posts about these if people want to get nerdy and go through my page. I've talked about this a zillion times, but D-mannose is amazing. I also don't recommend things unless I have personally used them myself. So I made it successfully until about 2 years ago. I made it through my whole woman lifehood of never having a bladder infection, never having a UTI. And I was a little bit bummed out about that, as stupid as that sounds, because I wanted to be able to know what the process was and then practice on myself of like, well, what works and what doesn't work. Well, a couple of years ago, I was protesting. A baby got kidnapped by CPS. And so I was protesting that. And I was unable to get to the bathroom. And, you know, us ladies will hold it if it's not a clean place for us to go to the ladies' room. And so that's what I was doing. I was going many hours without being able to go to the ladies' room. And that's what happened. So I wound up getting a UTI. And so I went, yes, this is awesome. Now I get to practice all this stuff, because I want to be able to look at my patients and look at my students and go, this is what really works because I used it. Right? Like I tried it out on me and this is what worked for me. So I went and got all the things I have been recommending for years, and D-mannose will punch a UTI in the freaking throat and knock it out. I felt so much better in a good 24, 48 hours. I felt amazing. Was it gone? No. So I did the whole regimen, but I felt a lot better. So that's something I would definitely stick in my prepper's closet, is I would buy a big vat of that. And you can give it to kids too, because babies are a little bit more susceptible to those, again, because they just have a lower immune system. Their immune system isn't fully developed yet. And they're babies, you know, they're in diapers. They're exposed to bacteria. I don't care if you change in that diaper every hour. They are sitting in their own excrement. And so they're just able to they're more exposed to that.
So I got kind of maybe one more question here, and then we'll kind of figure out where people can follow you and that kind of thing. But I had a guy on a while back. His name was Jake Drum, and he does first, medical, that kind of stuff as well. And he said something to me that has stuck with me ever since. And he said that 99%, or I don't know the exact, but of, post shit hit the fan medical care is going to be changing diapers. And he was being a little facetious, but what he meant was, wound care, hygiene, and looking after the infirmed. Do you agree with that? And do you want to expand on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I've gone rounds and rounds with people in the prepping community, because if you've noticed today, I didn't talk about trauma at all.
Sure.
And there's a reason for that. I know that the prepping community loves things like tourniquets and chest seals and hemostatic gauze. Look, I love that stuff too. It's super sexy. Okay. I was able to use all that stuff in the military way before civilians were able to use that. It was amazing cool. But I've been a paramedic. I've been a paramedic for a long time. I've been in EMS for a long time. I've worked in humongous busy services. We're talking, huge cities running EMS. And even in those situations where I'm dealing with other civil servants getting injured or patients themselves getting injured, you just don't use that stuff all of the time. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't carry it, because if you're going to be prepared, you should be prepared for trauma as well as medical. But things like fevers and dehydration and diabetic wounds and your geriatric patients that have diapers and your pediatric patients that are in diapers and postpartum women who have pads and menstruating women who are going to be bleeding. They have an open wound in their uterus every 28 days. Those are definitely the situations that when you don't know what is normal versus abnormal, or when you don't know how to care for those things, people can die. You can die from a UTI. You can die from kidney stones in situations where you don't know how to take care of those things. And we've gotten into a situation where the common everyday first world countries are just so used to being able to go to the corner store. Mm-hmm. That we forget that most of the world doesn't have that ability and knows how to use the plants in their front yard and knows how to harvest it, medicine from their forest or from their wilderness, whatever that would look like. So being able to know how to navigate the world around you and have that think outside the box mentality and picking up some basic, very, very basic medical skills. Absolutely no way, shape, or form do I expect people to take my class and go, I can't wait to deliver a baby. No, I like to do that. But what I want to be able to have is people to walk away and go, okay, I don't know that I necessarily want to do that, but I know how to do that. And now I feel prepared and I'm not as scared of it anymore. And so now I feel confident in myself. My goal is to have people take my course and never need me. I don't want you to need me. My goal and my job is to pass the torch so you can glean from the knowledge that I have and you feel confident to take care of yourself, your family, your surrounding loved ones, and the community around you. That is the essence of being prepared.
That's a perfect place to wind up. That was really good. I didn't even need to be here tonight. You're incredible. My goodness. Thank you, Jessica.
Oh, you're so sweet. How kind of you.
How do people follow up with you? How do they throw money at you? How can they take your courses, buy your care bags, all of that?
Yeah, so my website is just combatmidwife.com, and you can send me a message. All of my social medias are that. So YouTube, Instagram, I'm super active on. Facebook will auto-populate everything from Instagram to that, Telegram, all the things. X, all the stuff. So I have the same name for all of them. So it's just Combat Midwife on everything. And you can send me an email. I will answer you eventually. There's a lot of emails in there. I will answer you eventually. I promise. But I will get to you. And then I've never said no to a conference. So a lot of people want to get the knowledge that I've been training the military with for too many years for me to say out loud. And so I love to have people contact me and say, hey, I've got 10 people. Hey, I've got 20 people. Hey, I've got 30 people that really want to take your course. Will you come hang out with us and teach us? And I say yes every time. So I've yet to say no. Nobody from Canada has asked me to come. Maybe I'll come hang out with you. I do have a passport. So, So anyway, you can just host a class and I'll come to you and bring all the fun stuff and my mannequin with me and we'll do all the things. You'll get lots of hands-on. I love to have those kind of smaller community courses, if you will, because then everybody gets to get hands-on and touch the mannequin and play with the fake blood and all that fun stuff, which is so cool.
Well, thank you. This was the hour. We've been almost an hour and 10 minutes, and this has absolutely flown by. So thank you. Yeah, if you're up for it, I'd love to have you back in the future because I'd love to put a whole list of questions together from the community for you, and maybe we'll do like a Q&A or something if you'd be down for that.
I absolutely love that. I love to be able to help people with the real situations that they've got going on. I know we covered a really broad topic right now, and each one of the topics we talked about could be their own hour. And that'd be too much for tonight, but I would love to hear from your community. So yeah, toss the questions to Tim and then, rendezvous with me, Tim, and we'll figure it all out. And I would love to answer all those questions.
I would love that. If you want to hang in the back for just a second, I'll close up the show and I'll be right back with you. Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed that because I know I sure as hell did. That was a quick hour. I was one of the quickest hours I think I've ever done here. And probably if you went back and looked at the transcript, probably the least amount of words I've ever said during an interview, which is good. She was a consummate professional, and support her in any way you can, because that's the beauty of our community. We have lots of medical professionals in here, and we believe in keeping the economy circular and within all our friends. And she came by way of a friend, Bobby Spaggs. So guys, do whatever you can to give her some support. And if this is something you're interested in, take her up on one of her courses. Absolutely. And guys, thanks for dropping in. I know it was a Sunday and it was Father's Day, but it was great to have a crowd in here this evening. So as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.